Hello, this is a daily report for Wednesday, March 30th. As is the usual trend in the middle of the work week, Korea's daily COVID-19 tally has rebounded to above 400,000 new infections. We start now with the global pandemic updates. So I'll just start us off then.
Sunny, as you said, cases have rebounded back to the 400,000 level. Let's first take a look at the exact number that was tallied as of 12 a.m. this Wednesday, 424,641. Now, that does mark a jump from the past 2 days, but if we compare the figure to last Wednesday, it is actually an on-week decline by around 66,000 infections. By region, most places have reported an increase from the day before, including Gyeonggi-do province, which is back at the 6-digit level with over 117,000 cases tallied. And what's unfortunate is that we're seeing over 400 people who have lost their lives in the past day, or more than 400 new deaths have been added in the past day. And this marks the second highest single-day death toll that Korea has reported so far. And also, the number of patients in severe or critical condition now stands at above 1,300, and that also is a record high. And now let's move over to our vaccination figures. We've got now more than 44.9 million and more than 44.48 million people who have been inoculated with either a first or second dose or are being considered fully vaccinated. And onto our booster shot figures, we've got 32.68 million, or a little around 63.7% who have received an additional dose, with a little over 20,000 people who have received that jab on the day before. Globally, there's been a rise by around 1.8 million new cases in the world, with around 5,200 additional fatalities. And those are the general updates I have for now, but I'll have more updates on the international front in a bit. Sunny?
All right, so thank you for those tallies. Meanwhile, back here on the local front, the Prime Minister has made note of our current COVID-19 trend, and I have Choi Min-jung in the studio with details on that. Min-jung, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Sunny.
Right then, let's begin with his remarks.
Well, Prime Minister Kim Boo-kyum said the country's outbreak is now on a downward trend after reaching its peak. He also thanked the public for their cooperation and their perseverance at such a challenging time. Despite the falling number of infections, however, Kim reminded everyone that we must remain vigilant. Let's take a listen.
People are letting their guards down, knowing that the Omicron variant has a low fatality rate. However, if you look at the figures, deaths are currently concentrated among the elderly. Taking this into account, Omicron still poses a grave threat.
The government has come under fire recently for the rising number of hospitalizations and deaths, as even today, like Suam mentioned, the number of people in critical condition has touched a record high. The Prime Minister offered his apology regarding this matter and said the government will take the criticism seriously. But he also reassured the public that thanks to their efforts, Korea's fatality rate is much lower than that of other countries with a similar number of cases. Senior health official Son Young-rae also said that the number of severely ill patients is lower than initially forecast, which was 2,000 at most. Thanks to oral pills and Omicron's comparatively mild effects, officials have downgraded their projection to a maximum of 1,700 severe cases.
Right, and Min-jung, I hear COVID-19 infections among the elderly is on the rise, though.
That's right, Sunny. Currently, people aged 60 and above take up around 1 in 5 new infections. And last month, this age group accounted for around 10% of all infections. But now that figure has doubled. Health authorities say the elderly are becoming more vulnerable to infections, as many of them got their booster shots more than 3 months ago. And the protection offered by that extra dose is starting to wane. And despite this, authorities are once again asking seniors to get their boosters if they haven't done so yet, saying they are still 97% effective in preventing severe illnesses.
On the treatment front, Min-jung, I hear we have more medical care options for at-home COVID-19 patients.
That's right, Sunny. Those in home recovery will have more access to in-person treatment starting this Wednesday. Local health centers, including traditional medicine clinics, can submit their applications to provide in-person treatment for COVID patients. Previously, outpatient treatment was mainly limited to medical centers specialized in respiratory diseases. Patients can now book an appointment for in-person treatment and are allowed to visit clinics and hospitals even if they're under self-isolation. However, people must take note that any drugs they need have to be picked up by someone who is not in quarantine.
Clinics and hospitals have separate appointment times and areas for COVID patients to prevent infected people and healthy people from being in the same area at the same time. However, it's very difficult to apply the same measures to pharmacies. So another person must pick up the medication instead of the patients themselves. And if this is impossible, they can pay and have them delivered to their homes.
On the vaccination front, Minjung, I understand inoculations for children are starting this week, right?
That's right, Sunny. Beginning Thursday, children aged 5 to 11 will be able to get their COVID-19 vaccines. Around 1,200 medical centers nationwide will be providing Pfizer shots for these children, and health authorities are strongly advising that minors at high risk, including children with obesity or weakened immune systems, get inoculated. The same recommendation applies to children who have previously contracted COVID-19 if they're at high risk, but not if they're healthy otherwise. Children in this age group will be given 2 shots at an interval of 8 weeks, and they must be accompanied by a legal guardian.
Minjung, one final question before you go then. What's the fate of our social restrictions, which will come to an end on Sunday?
Well, officials appear to be weighing the option of easing our current restrictions. As of now, private gatherings are capped at 8 people, and most businesses must close by 11 p.m. The rules are set to expire on Sunday, and new measures will likely come into effect starting next week. The expected changes are likely to include a higher social gathering cap of 10 people from the current 8, and they're also likely to extend business hours to midnight. Authorities have said that now is the time to encourage people to take individual responsibility rather than imposing restrictions which they say are no longer effective. They also said that such rigorous curbs are unnecessary when considering Omicron's low fatality rate, currently at less than 1%. Officials, though, are well aware that cases may spike if restrictions are all eased at once and has hinted at a gradual process. The country's Pandemic Recovery Committee will meet on Thursday to discuss revisions, and authorities are scheduled to announce the new measures on Friday.
And I'm sure you'll update us as soon as that is done. All right, Minjung, thank you for the latest on the local front. I'll see you back here on Thursday.
Thank you.
Right, on the international front then, U.S. authorities have approved a second booster dose. So tell us more about that.
Right, Sunny. The authorization for a second booster or 4th dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech or Moderna vaccine paves the way for more than 30 million Americans to receive additional protection against COVID-19. And this also roughly coincides with the BA.2 subvariant of Omicron becoming the dominant strain in the U.S., accounting for around 55% recently. So let's first take a listen to the statement from the White House regarding the vaccine approval.
So this is a good thing, and it is a straightforward thing. The CDC and the FDA are now allowing and will make available booster shots, a 4th shot for people over 50 and for the immunocompromised.
Earlier, health officials had also considered setting the age limit to at least 60 or 65 years, but the FDA explained that given the number of Americans over 50 with underlying health conditions, making more people eligible would make more sense. These people will be able to receive an additional booster shot at least 4 months after their first booster. The same interval will be applied to people aged 12 and up who have certain immune deficiencies. The latest decision has been made to protect more vulnerable citizens before autumn from a possible resurgence in COVID-19 infections and waning immunity from earlier vaccinations. Here's more on that from an expert.
We have data now from the Centers for Disease Control showing that after a few months out of your first booster, you have a decline in effectiveness to around 66% protection against emergency room visits, 78% versus hospitalizations.
And data also suggests that the booster shot campaign that started last year in the U.S. has helped in bringing down deaths during the Omicron wave in winter. And researchers also refer to recent studies from Israel, which also showed a lower mortality rate among people who got boosted twice. Now, the CDC on Tuesday also published data indicating that those who were inoculated with a single-dose Johnson & Johnson jab they were better protected against severe illness during the Omicron wave after receiving a Moderna or Pfizer booster shot rather than receiving another Johnson & Johnson jab.
Right. So we covered efforts to develop an Omicron-tailored vaccine quite a number of times on our show. But quite recently, Pfizer has hinted that current vaccines may be just as effective for the time being, though.
Right, Sunny. Pfizer and Moderna are continuing their development of new versions of their respective vaccines to better perform against any variants, including Omicron and maybe also other possible variants in the future. But recently, Pfizer's CEO Albert Bourla mentioned in an interview, it's not easy to have new vaccines ready to go every 5 or 6 months. So until the new ones are approved, they're recommending the original vaccine to be used as second boosters. Meanwhile, the FDA's top vaccine official said that even if new vaccines are rolled out later this year, it does not mean that people who receive their second boosters now would be, quote, precluded from benefiting from a new vaccine.
Right, that is good to know then. Meanwhile, over in Singapore, I understand people there so are able to venture outdoors without their face masks for the first time in 2 years.
That's right, Sunny. And Singapore was actually once one of the strictest places to be in terms of COVID-19 measures, but also one of the first ones to go with a so-called living with COVID-19 strategy, which again had to be reversed during the Omicron wave. Now, starting on Tuesday, the country relaxed social distancing measures and mask rules again to gradually return to pre-pandemic lives. It's now optional to wear face masks in outdoor settings, and the cap on social gatherings has been raised from 5 to 10 people. Masks are still mandatory indoors, with indoor venues referring to buildings or locations with clearly defined entrances and exits, including offices, shopping malls, public transit, and coffee shops. Local media reported that on the first day of relaxed measures, most Singaporeans still preferred to wear their masks outdoors, but anticipated larger groups of gatherings. Now, meanwhile, starting on April 1st, this was an announcement that was also recently made. Quarantine ends for vaccinated travelers to Singapore.
Right, good to know. And speaking of travel, North Korea, I understand, is promoting its tourism industry despite its border restrictions.
Right, Sunny. Remember just yesterday we talked about North Korea's testing figures, and we do not talk a lot about North Korea in terms of COVID-19, but we have some related news today. While North Korea at the very early stages of the pandemic had strictly closed borders even to its ally China, now it has posted some interesting promotions on its state-run tourism website. That includes an announcement regarding the Pyongyang Marathon, which invites some 1,000 athletes from countries around the world every year in April. The event had been called off during the pandemic, and in fact, just a month ago, one travel agency said it will be canceled for the 3rd straight year. The North also advertised a bilateral senior culture program between North Korea and China, including calligraphy and various performances. Now, there are no details on the exact schedule or the program itinerary, but it may seem that North Korea is also kind of reopening now.
Right, easing its border restrictions then. All right, so as always, thank you very much for that coverage.
My pleasure.
We begin our new segment on this Wednesday afternoon in Eastern Europe. Russia has pledged to pull back its military offensive around the Ukrainian capital city, but the U.S. remains skeptical, that is. Our Ji-young explains.
Peace talks between Russia and Ukraine are gaining momentum as Russia promised to scale back its military presence in Ukraine's capital. Delegations from Russia and Ukraine held their first direct talks in more than 2 weeks in Istanbul on Tuesday, and they said some progress was made during discussions. The Russian defense minister said Moscow would reduce military operations near the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv and the northern city of Chernihiv to increase the trust in the talks.
The Russian Defense Ministry, in order to increase mutual trust and create the necessary conditions for further negotiations and achieving the ultimate goal of agreeing and signing the above-mentioned treaty, made a decision to radically, by a large margin, reduce military activity in the Kyiv and Chernihiv regions.
However, U.S. officials were skeptical of Russia's announcement, with the White House saying, "We're not going to take their word for it."
We believe any movement of forces from around Kyiv is a redeployment and not a withdrawal, and the world should be prepared for a major offensive against other areas of Ukraine. Everyone should expect that we're going to continue to see attacks across Ukraine.
Despite the talks, Russian shelling continues. Moscow forces struck the office of the regional military governor in the southern Ukrainian port city of Mykolaiv. Local authorities said a Russian rocket killed at least 12 people and injured at least 33, with the building half demolished. 엄지영, Arirang News.
In other news, fresh dispute over historical facts appears inevitable between Seoul and Tokyo, among the latter's recent disclosure of textbooks to be used at Japanese schools. Our Kim Hyo-san reports.
The controversy over history textbooks has again risen to the surface with Tokyo's announcement of the screening results of the new reading materials to be provided to Japanese students. In the new textbooks to be used by 2nd and 3rd grade high school students from next year, the word forced has been deleted when referring to the Korean people who were forced into hard labor during World War II at Japanese mines and industrial facilities. Related segments have been modified to say mobilization or conscription instead of forced. In addition, many of the books approved by Japan's Education Ministry have omitted the expression wartime comfort women when describing the Korean women sexually enslaved by Japan's Imperial Army. Some of the books have also downplayed related historical facts. However, when it comes to Dokdo, Korean islets in the East Sea, the textbooks reiterate Japan's false territorial claims over them and accuses South Korea of occupying Dokdo in an illegal manner. Following the announcement, South Korea expressed its deep regret. Seoul's foreign ministry urged Tokyo to provide students with proper history education based on, quote, the spirit of apology that some of Japan's past leaders showed regarding Japan's wartime atrocities. The ministry also summoned the deputy chief of mission at Japanese embassy in Seoul to deliver a formal protest. On Dokdo, South Korean officials made it clear that none of Japan's claims are acceptable. Also expressing its deep regret, Seoul's education ministry called for immediate revisions to be made to the books. Kim Hyo-san, Arirang News.
On the local front, the first year of the pandemic, that would be the year 2020, forced workers here to take out more loans to mark a record high in average outstanding debt. Our Min Soo-kyun has more.
During the first year of the COVID-19 outbreak in South Korea, the average amount borrowed in loans by those in employment rose by more than 10% on year, the largest increase ever recorded. According to Statistics Korea on Tuesday, as of the end of 2020, the average loan amount of South Korean workers was around $40,000, up 10.3% on year. The growth rate was much higher than the 5.6% increase in 2019. The increase was mostly attributed to more credit loans, which jumped over 19%, as well as more non-housing mortgage loans, which climbed almost 16%. Mortgage loans only inched up 1.6%. Statistics Korea explained that the COVID-19 outbreak, the country's low interest rate, and increased investments on rallying stock markets led to an overall surge in loans. By gender, men on average borrowed almost double the amount that women did. The average for men came to around $49,000, while the average for women was far lower at $28,000. By age group, those aged between 40 and 49 recorded the highest amount borrowed on average at $58,000, followed by those aged 30 to 39 at $53,000. The loan delinquency rate, meaning the percentage of loans that are left unpaid, stood at 0.5%, falling by 0.1 percentage point on year. Min Soo-kyun, Arirang News.
On a light note, K-pop is maintaining its winning streak on the global stage. It's topping charts, views, and sales. Here's our Song Yoo-jin.
K-pop is no longer enjoyed only by Koreans, but has instead become a major part of global culture. Evidence for this can be seen as K-pop superstars BTS extended their long streak on the US Billboard chart. As of Tuesday, the group's songs My Universe and Butter have spent 26 weeks on the Billboard 200 chart, placing 24th and 34th respectively this week. Following in their footsteps, another K-pop boy band, Stray Kids, topped the Billboard 200 chart on Tuesday, making it the third time a South Korean artist or band have reached the top spot. K-pop stars are not only grabbing the ears of the global audience, but their eyes as well. According to analysis from Korean news outlet The Jungang Daily on Wednesday, BTS videos on YouTube were played a total of 15 billion times from March 2021 to February 2022. Surprisingly, it was Japan and not South Korea that had the greatest number of views with 2 billion. India and Indonesia trailed behind, while South Korea placed outside the top 5 in 6th with 768 million views. Videos by other K-pop artists, including Blackpink, Twice, ITZY, and 17, were also viewed mostly by a foreign audience. On the back of this global craving for K-pop, record sales are skyrocketing as well. Latest data from the Korea Customs Service shows that last year, the number of albums sold by South Korean artists surpassed the 50 million mark for the first time, with half of them being sold abroad. While only 23 countries imported South Korean albums in 2012, the figure jumped almost 4 times to 88 countries in 2021. During the same period, South Korea's record exports in terms of value grew exponentially as well. While album exports logged around $24 million in 2012, they jumped about 3 times to $74.5 million in 2019 and almost 10 times to $200 million in 2021, setting a new record. 송유진, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. Peruvian President Pedro Castillo survived an impeachment vote in Congress on Monday, with votes falling short of the figure needed to oust the president, who's been in office for just 8 months. With a total of 130 votes available in Congress, 55 lawmakers were in favor of removing Castillo from office. However, 87 votes were needed to complete the impeachment process. Surprisingly, in the 8 months he's been in office, it's already the second attempt to impeach him after surviving a similar move against him late last year. Castillo has been facing accusations of graft while citing Russia's invasion of Ukraine as the reason behind the country's recent economic crisis. Peru has seen 5 presidents since 2016. In 2018, Pedro Pablo Kuczynski resigned before an impeachment vote, while Martin Vizcarra was impeached in 2020. An Arab gunman shot and killed at least 5 people in Tel Aviv on Tuesday, marking the 3rd deadly attack in Israel in just a week. According to authorities, the gunman was also shot dead after firing at people using an assault rifle. The latest shooting raised the number of people killed by Arab gunmen in Israel to 11 over the past week, the sharpest spike in attacks on city streets in years. While little is known about the shooter, local media say he's believed to be a Palestinian from the occupied West Bank. Over in China, a modified version of the Long March 6 carrier rocket made its maiden flight on Tuesday, successfully sending 2 satellites into orbit. The rocket blasted off from the Taiwan Satellite Launch Center and is the country's first carrier rocket type to be equipped with solid strap-on boosters. One of the 2 satellites launched by the rocket will carry out scientific tests and research, including a land and resources survey, while the other will carry out tests to verify space environment detection technology. The latest launch was the 412th mission of the Long March rocket series. Queen Elizabeth II was seen in public for the first time in 5 months on Tuesday, as she joined the royal family and other dignitaries at a memorial service for her late husband, Prince Philip. Joining the Queen in the congregation were foreign kings and queens, friends of the late Duke, politicians including Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and military figures. Prince Andrew was also seen for the first time at a public event since he made an undisclosed payment to settle a U.S. lawsuit over allegations he sexually assaulted a teenage girl decades ago. Buckingham Palace said the 95-year-old Queen had been actively involved in the planning of the memorial service, despite limiting her duties after contracting COVID-19 earlier this year. 이승재, Arirang News.
Pokemon bread. It's a walk down memory lane for those who were children in the early 2000s. That is how pundits are explaining the recent raging popularity of this affordable snack here in the country. Do take a look.
BTS's RM took to social media recently to share his latest snacking obsession. It was none other than a Pokemon-themed pastry item. BTS fans and others soon flocked to convenience stores and supermarkets nationwide in search of RM's favorite snack, and they were quickly sold out everywhere in no time. Pokemon-themed pastries were originally launched more than 20 years ago and discontinued in 2006, before they reappeared on store shelves once again earlier this year.
공식 홈페이지라든지 아니면 저희 SNS 계정으로 그 고객분들께서 많이들 다시 출시해달라는 요구가 있으셨어요. 현재 이제 사회적으로 코로나 이슈 때문에 그 많은 고객분들이 지쳐 있잖아요. 그 지쳐 있는 고객분들에게 잠시나마 추억 여행을 하시면서 좀 즐겁고 행복한 시간 보내셨으면 좋겠다라는 생각에서 포켓몬빵을 기획하고 다시 출시하게 되었습니다.
The popularity of the newly revived Pokemon pastries was further fueled by the collectible stickers that came with the packaging. These stickers are engraved with everyone's favorite Pokemon characters and can be used as a reusable seal. These character seals have become highly valued collectible items of their own and has led to many customers buying the pastry just for the stickers.
3살, 4살 때부터 포켓몬스터를 만화로 접했어요. 그래서 그때부터도 피카츄 인형과 함께 그런 지냈던 사진들이 있는데 이번에 1세대 포켓몬 중에 피카츄를 제일 좋아하는데 아직 피카츄를 못 뽑아서 피카츄가 나올 때까지 계속 빵을 먹을 생각입니다.
약 130여 곳 돌아서 얻은 게 총 13장을 얻었습니다. 요즘엔 진짜 유튜브뿐만 아니라 뭐 틱톡, 인스타부터 해가지고 페이스북까지 엄청 많이 그게 활발해지다 보니까 그게 급속도로 퍼지고 연예인들 또한 이거가 하면서 동참하면서 이게 엄청 커진 것 같아요.
These Pokemon stickers have also started appearing in online auction sites, often commanding higher prices than those of the original product. So just how difficult has it become to get your hands on a Pokemon-themed pastry as an average customer?
포켓몬빵 있어요. 그게 사기 힘듭니다. 아 그래요? 하루에 한 개, 2개 이럴밖에 안 들어요. 포켓몬빵은 안 들어오나요? 예, 들어와도 사람들이 여기 기다렸다가 사갈 수 있을 거예요.
Our production crew visited 5 different convenience stores in search of this elusive item, but walked away empty-handed. The Pokemon franchise was born in 1996 and quickly grew into a phenomenon that defined an entire generation of children. Pokemon-themed pastries were soon released in Korea, following a license deal with the original Japanese creators. The pastries have been especially popular among young people in their 20s and 30s, many of whom grew up watching the Pokemon animated series in their adolescent years.
지금 사회문화적인 트렌드가 레트로, 복고에 대한 열망 수준들이 있잖아요. 그래서 그게 일종의 큰 트렌드라고 얘기할 수가 있을 텐데 지금 포켓몬은 이제 그것들의 일종의 구체적으로 구현된 그런 현상이다라고 얘기를 할 수가 있을 것 같고요. 지금 레트로라고 하는 큰 트렌드 안에 그 20, 30대가 과거에 어렸을 때를 추억하는 그러한 일종의 도구로서 지금 이 포켓몬 빵에 대한 열광들을 좀 설명할 수 있는 현상이라고 생각합니다.
Since its relaunch, 1.5 million Pokemon pastries were sold nationwide, nearly 6-fold higher than the average sales volume of a newly released snack product. SPC's Hamnip, the food maker behind the Pokemon pastries, saw its share prices soar and is expected to report solid earnings this year.
기대했던 것보다도 너무나도 많은 이슈들과 인기가 있는 걸로 판단이 돼서 굉장히 감사하고 아직은 얼떨떨한 분위기이고요. 기존 제품에 대한 공급도 빠르게 좀 늘릴 수 있도록 여러 조치 그리고 여러 노력들 하고 있으니까 조만간 많은 소비자분들께서도 경험하시고 저희 포켓몬빵을 구매하실 수 있을 거라고 기대하고 있습니다.
The Pokemon pastry fever may yet persist in Korea for the time being, because for those who still haven't completed their sticker collection, they gotta catch 'em all.
Late last month, a Korean Netflix original, Juvenile Justice, caught quite a bit of global attention and has since reignited debate over the issue of youth crime and criminal liability here in the country. For more, I have visiting Professor An Jun-sung from Yonsei University. Professor An, it's a pleasure to have you back.
Thank you.
I also have Professor Cho Hee-kyung at Hongik University joining this particular session virtually. Welcome back, Professor Cho.
Thank you for having me.
Professor An, we'll start here then. Let's begin with some background information with regard to the standard judicial response to juvenile delinquency here in the country.
Yeah, I mean, before we discuss the issue from a legal perspective, we need to start with the legal definitions first. The juvenile, under the Korean Juvenile Act, the juvenile is defined to be a person under the age of 19, right? So what happened was, and then for this, make sure that some people got confused because Korean society have a Korean aging, right? Which is different from the Korean one. But there's a legal age, so it's very important in terms of a legal perspective. And the court actually checking like 11 months and 11 years and 13 months. 10 months, something like that, calculation. So you have to be very specific, the months, right? Also, there's one, the juvenile, right. Okay, there's also a definition for juvenile protection case, which is applied to age between 14 and 18. So that's the more like the government given protection for the age of certain age juveniles, right? And that's the one we talk today, ages 14 to 18, right?
Right, and Professor Cho, under Korea's legal framework, how are first-time youth offenders disciplined?
So if you are a juvenile, i.e. under the age of 19, you are technically not liable for any crimes that you commit under the criminal code. And obviously that is not a desirable state of affairs. So they enacted this Juvenile Act in order to be able to deal with juvenile offenders, so children who are too young to be tried as an adult, but who should still be held responsible in some way for their actions. And so under the Juvenile Act, those under 10 years of age are still not being held responsible. But if you're above 10 years, between 10 and 14, you can be subjected to what's known as protective orders. And there are, in the law, 10 different protective orders provided for that the judge can order with respect to the juvenile offender who's before the court. And it ranges, the protective orders range from releasing the juvenile into the custody of a guardian. It can be a parent or some other person who can actually act as a parent, to giving them, courses on how to perhaps manage their anger, or even making them do volunteer service. If you're above certain age, I think you have to be at least 14 to be able to do this, up to the most stringent order, which is to actually incarcerate that juvenile in a juvenile detention center for up to 2 years. And so there are various protective orders that a judge can make against the juvenile.
Right. Now, Professor An, it appears that the number of crimes committed by first-time child offenders is on the rise, as is the rate of recidivism. Could you tell us more about this reality?
Yes, well, actually, I've been doing a little bit research on it, on the issue, but actually the data I'm receiving, there's a little, some differences actually, so I will very carefully the comment on this. According to the Ministry of Justice data, there's about 9,000 juvenile cases in 2020. There's reported cases, and for the past 5 years, interesting, and then over 60% of the juvenile crime was committed the person at the age of 13. So more than half of the juvenile crime was committed when they were age 13, right? So, and also there's repeat offense rate is about 12.5%, which is about 3 times higher than that of adults. So it's a much higher repeat offense rate, and that's going to be a bit concerning. But however, that's not only a legal perspective, but the repeat offense cases is a more societal issue. Maybe the systemic failure, how we teach them, how we give them a second chance, the systemic failure, possibly also legal perspective. I think from the legal perspective, there's an easy solution actually, and from my opinion, because that there's like an enhanced sentence system, just like in California. There's like 3-strike rules, means that you have a lenient sentence for the first offense, a second offense, fine, but third time we will really heavy, the penalties imposed. Well, if we have this current juvenile system, if we have the only one time, first time offender maybe only got protected classes, only cases only, or if a second offense, maybe you can just get it as the adult, taken as adult. If they know that if I do commit twice, there will be no mercy on them, as if they're juniors, right? I mean, juvenile, right? Then maybe sending some message, very clear message, and kind of deter their more further crimes, I think.
Right. Professor Cho, debate over the minimum age now for delinquency jurisdiction is nothing new. Having said that, what appear to be the issues of contention here in the country then?
So as you say, there is a perception that juvenile crime is on the rise, and people believe that juveniles, knowing that they won't be punished or they won't have any criminal liability on the Juvenile Act, deliberately go out and commit offenses, and there is no practical way to hold them liable either under juvenile law or under criminal code. And that has been suggested as the biggest issue. But I would approach the statistics that we are receiving with some skepticism, because if you actually look at the real numbers, you can't really say that there is a trend that it's on the rise. Some years the numbers actually dip. Some years it does go up. In the last couple of years, there was a sudden increase in the more serious crimes committed by juveniles, but we have to question whether it's a case of more cases being reported or whether there are actually more crimes being committed. And the second thing that we know about based on data is that serious crimes such as violent crimes such as robbery or grievous bodily harm, those kind of crimes are actually on the decrease amongst juveniles, whereas sexual offenses are on the increase. And that, I think, is a lot to do with the fact that teenagers and young people are much more exposed to sexual material online, and those are the kind of things that we need to delve into more deeply. The question of age is an age-old question, I can say. Even in the Roman days, they actually struggled with this, and they had a much more kind of very graduated response. They used to classify juveniles into 7 to 12, and then 12 to 19, and 19 to 25. And they said between 7 to 12, we have to question whether the child is actually aware of what they have done is wrong or right. And between 12 and so on and so forth. And so I don't think it's a case of just simply setting an age limit or a standard in age and saying, okay, we are going to punish everybody under the age of 12, because we are not actually addressing the root causes. And what are you going to do if you lower the age to 13 and then 12 and then 11-year-olds commit the crime and 10-year-olds and so forth? What are you going to do about that? And at the same time, if you're going to hold them up to the same kind of legal responsibility for offenses that they commit, then we should be giving them same kind of legal rights that they should enjoy. So if they are able to be held criminally liable for their actions, then they should also have the same kind of rights under the law. But we are not actually talking about that. So I would question simply lowering age of juvenile offenders.
Right. And moving beyond national borders, for the sake of comparison, Professor Ahn, what can you tell us about the minimum age for delinquency jurisdiction in other countries?
Yeah, actually, interesting question. People talk about it, right? But the Korean Juvenile Act was enacted in 1953, 7 years ago, right? And 2003, the Korean Constitutional Court ruled that the criminal minor age of under 14, it was constitutional because they deemed that it is not excessively lower compared to other countries. Let's talk about other countries like UK, the 10 year. And then the Canada is 12, and US is very by state, but between 7 to 14. But China was about 16, interesting. But however, in China, I think that doing my research, and the age of 14 and 15, they have a criminal prosecution. So just like Gov't, right? So the question is that why? So interesting about UK perspective, I read news about UK side, and then they're so low compared to other countries. They're kind of at the public debate whether they should increase the minimum age of criminal responsibility because 10 kind of is pretty young. So I think in this moment, I think that we're talking about Korea, and we try to maybe decrease by 1 or 2 years younger about age about 12. But still, once again, I agree with Professor Joe. Just simply lowering the minimum age of criminal responsibility does not solve all problems. Because there are a lot of things caused by systemic failure.
Right. Staying abroad, Professor Joe, what can you share with us about the different approaches to juvenile delinquency across the nations? I mean, some nations have chosen to adopt a more therapeutic intervention philosophy, claiming that it reduces repeated crimes, while other countries have taken more punitive actions. Could you tell us more?
You're right. So most countries that do have juvenile justice system, not all countries do tend to have a range of orders that a judge can make with regard to the juvenile, similar to ours, from protective custodial orders to incarceration in detention centers. But what other countries do that are much more effective, that are not available in our country, is what you just mentioned, which is therapeutic treatment of the juvenile. Now, in terms of preventing juvenile crimes or crimes in general, we can talk about primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention methods. And primary prevention is all about internalization of values, the right kind of values. You know what you are doing is right and wrong. You know what harm you might be doing to other people. And that kind of primary prevention is really done through education and having a social relationship with other people. And so the role of family and schools are really important. And very often in juvenile offenders cases, they come from, I can only generalize here, but in most cases, they do have problematic background. They may suffer abuse from their own custodians. They may come from broken homes. They may be bullied at home, at school. So there are, they may, and in a lot of cases, they also suffer from poverty. And so those kind of contributing factors, unless they are actually addressed at a root level, it's not going to help prevent the juvenile from committing recidivism and engaging in other offenses. The secondary prevention method is actually taking physical and mechanical means to prevent crimes from occurring. That could range from, having better lighting in an area or more police patrol, all sorts of those kind of things. And criminal justice system is only the third level of prevention, or even prevention. And it's the least effective method of prevention, because by the time criminal system gets involved, it's way too late. Too late for the victims, too late for the offender to actually reconsider, too late for the society generally, particularly for juveniles. And another thing that we know about juvenile offenders is that teenagers, juveniles, their brain is different from an adult brain. Their brain is very volatile. A juvenile offender will know what they're doing is right or wrong. They know the wrongness of their conduct, but what they can't do is actually have sufficient self-control over their own conduct and have the insight about what kind of effect what they're doing is going to have on the rest of their lives. And so they're much more susceptible to peer pressure than adult offender is. And so this is why it's so critical for us to get in there early to help them and prevent them from committing crimes in the first place, rather than trying to, increase punishment and, giving them longer incarceration and lowering the minimum age, etc. That's just not going to help.
Right. But regardless of that, President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol himself has also pledged, he pledged during his campaign rally, that the minimum age for delinquency jurisdiction should be lowered to about 12. And the Justice Ministry here has acknowledged the need for this amendment. What are your thoughts, Professor An?
Yes, going back to the same question, it's simply lowering the minimum age does not solve the problem. The problem is that I think we need to get more preparation. For example, like I actually think about a 7-year-old law, Juvenile Act, maybe time to amend. Yes, I agree with that. However, how to do it, that's really the things we'd have to discuss it. Think about there's only one juvenile prison in Korea at this moment. So, and there's overpopulated already. So think about the situation. Let's say you just increasing the lowering age, and then about the 60% of the juvenile case actually committed by the age of 13. So then quite a surge of the increase of the criminal number at the juvenile prison, right? And how we're going to handle it? You have to build more prisons nationwide, right? That's not, it costs money and the time. Also, there was a female and male separate prison. We said 2 more, perhaps. There's a lot of issues. And are we prepared for this? I mean, just simply talking about lowering it, yes, fine. You can lower it, but you have to be prepared when you're doing it, right? So I think that you have time to do it. And then the system also, there's have to be system support, and to be that I think juvenile crime is not the personal crime, it's more like a societal problem issue, because that the society in part caused the crime, because that the juvenile, the kid minors didn't have a chance, had a good education, didn't have good resources and bad family, and got a family, something bad history. So it's helped to setting up more comprehensive plan is more important, and then try to get ready for that. I think that's the issue. We have to take, comprehensive approach.
Right. And keeping what you said in mind then, Professor An, I'm going to ask you a rather difficult question. What issues then need to be addressed to allow for perhaps a constructive revision to the legal framework governing youth crime then?
Actually, when I reviewed the Juvenile Act this morning, I was very surprised that, for example, there's no right to attorney for the juvenile. It's very interesting, and because it's, in a way they have a special law, and you have option to, hire a lawyer, but it's not mandatory, just like not a criminal case. So I think there are a lot of things you have to, amend it from the legal perspective, and then also, but I don't think there's a big difference. Even if you're lowering let's say lowering by 1 or 2 years, we want to change it. Was it going to deter the criminal rate? I disagree actually. Maybe a little bit lower, but you will produce much more juvenile criminal society, and then would it be better as a society, as a big picture? Is it better producing more juvenile criminals who will be going back to to society? That's the issue. Also a lot of, and then I think that's the one we think about systemic big picture. I think approach is necessary.
Professor Jo, based on what you've said so far, it appears that focusing perhaps on the causes of child crime would be a better alternative to simply seeking punitive actions against youth offenders. Having said that, what do you say, or how do you respond then to the prevalence, like you mentioned earlier on, of these heinous crimes perpetrated by first-time offenders, as opposed to the petty ones that we normally associate with children?
You're right. Yes, indeed. You mentioned that Netflix, so the series Juvenile Justice on this OTT platform, which kind of got us started, but that was actually inspired by a real life crime that was committed by a 17-year-old and a 19-year-old. Now, the offenders in that case were not subject to juvenile law, Juvenile Act, but the crime that they committed was so heinous that it couldn't actually be described in the media. Also, similarly, in the UK, we have the Jamie Bulger case, which happened now decades ago, but that's one of the reasons why UK would never be able to raise the minimum age for criminal liability for juveniles from above 10, because it was a case committed by two 10-year-olds with a 5-year-old, victim. Why is it that those kind of heinous crimes are on the rise? I don't know if it is, but we are certainly hearing more about it. In that Incheon case involving the two 17-year-old and 19-year-old, they talked about how they were sort of in this kind of online community that sort of allowed the manifestation and kind of gathering together of very violent kind of fantasies that could, and it, by allowing like-minded people to get together, they were able to sort of have this kind of motivation to actually carry it out. And something like that should be sort of looked at more closely. But I just wanted to also comment on, what could be done in our society. And Professor Ahn mentioned how juveniles don't actually have a right to an attorney in a juvenile case. But the point is there is no prosecutor in those hearings. And so the judge is supposed to act in the best interest of the juvenile offender in those cases. But in so many of those cases, the judges often only have maybe 5 minutes for a group of juveniles. There is a very famous judge who has been working on the juvenile court for nearly a decade. And you can see, he's sort of the videos of how he hears cases. And there is a group of, maybe 6 or 7 juvenile offenders in front of him. And he is yelling at them. And he explains later why he's yelling at them, because he says he doesn't have enough time to actually talk to them, really sort of talk to them, connect with them on a personal level, try to really talk some sense into them, etc. And so just actually, augmenting the numbers of judges who are responsible for juvenile cases and, valuing their work better would make a real difference in the very short term. We could just begin with that, for example.
Right, that is a point that we can take into consideration. Of course, Professor Ahn, finally, and very briefly speaking, what efforts perhaps then are needed within political circles to address this issue of youth crime here in the country?
Well, I think that we need to really see the big picture situation, because just once again, simply lowering the minimum age doesn't solve the whole problem. And what will happen? We think about what cause and effect situation, what kind of things, chain effect will happens. We have to build more, juvenile prison, and then more like reformatory system, reform and put more money on it, and hire more people to handle the situation and to prevent more societal things. And then lastly, I'd like to brief comment is that you have to look at the actual act. Act. It's about something very serious crime, just murder or arson. Maybe you should try as the adult, right? That doesn't matter how you. I should say, at least if you're 14, something you should get, treated like adult. If you do it, so U.S. system is like even though it's a minimum age, if you go above the responsibility level, minimum age, and then they see whether you by conduct is adult conduct. Doesn't matter you're 14 or 15, but the situation. So if you commit a murder, even if you're 14 or 15, you should be tried as like adult, because the way their system they see it.
Right, so you need to have a balance between punishment and reform then.
You separate the act and the age, right.
All right, Professor Ahn, as always, thank you very much for your thoughts. Professor Zhou, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Right, well, that is all the time we have for today. Thank you for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow, same time. That will be Thursday.